Ahoy, this is David Perry with my continuing series of online interviews with colleagues, friends around the world, talking about how we get from the great pause of this year of COVID into the great return. And I'm very pleased to have on the Zoom room line with me now a journalist who many people in the Bay Area and actually around the world know for his incredible reportage, someone who during the midst of all this, picked up and moved not across country, but across continents, across oceans. Please welcome Jules Older.
Ahoy to you.
Ahoy to you. So tell us, where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking to you from Auckland, New Zealand.
Beautiful city.
Our new apartment. We moved here August 1, boarded the plane. After 3 weeks of planning, the entire thing, beginning to end, 3 weeks, no extra days.
So, how long did you live in the San Francisco Bay Area?
15 years.
So, from 15 years to about a little more than 15 days, you changed your entire life and did a trans-Pacific. Of course, now you're in tomorrow. It's my tonight here. And I saw your video of it. You actually literally fled COVID, fled the United States for New Zealand. Tell us why. What was the impetus?
Well, fleeing COVID was part of the impetus, a big part of the impetus. Fleeing Trump was another big part of the impetus. And really the toxicity of the combination of no response, no real response to COVID, and the fact that the country was turning into something that I'd never seen and did not like was the other part. And we just made the decision like that on a walk in the park.
And which park was it, may I ask?
Sure, it was my local park, Lafayette.
There you go. So what is the biggest difference besides time change and more sheep than people between San Francisco and Auckland?
I think largely what I've just been talking about. And for me, the biggest change is the lack of fury every time I turn on the television or go to the internet. I still feel the fury actually, but it's in hopes of making a change back to the way the country should be run, to closer and closer to the way New Zealand is run. So I won't talk specifically about Auckland. I'll just talk about the difference in leadership that we experience. And here, Jacinda Ardern, our prime minister, decided at the beginning, very close to the beginning, to hit COVID hard, fast, with science and with kindness. And this is a hard combination to pull off, and she pulled it off. We have virtually 0 cases here now. We had 3 yesterday in a strange, weird thing that happened with somebody returning to New Zealand from India. Assuming that doesn't get any worse, we're down to 0. And the very partial lockdown that we've been having here, which is level 2.5, has gone down to level 2 for Auckland and down to level 1, which is essentially go about your business for the rest of the country.
Now, I've had the pleasure of visiting New Zealand several times in my life, most recently a few years ago with my husband, Alfredo, and we biked around the North Island for a week, just gorgeous. Auckland is a spectacular city, and it's a modern city, but yes. Just to push a little bit, and I'm not either defending or detracting, but there is a difference between a country like New Zealand and the United States. Do you really think you can compare the experience of COVID to a country as large as the United States and one as small as New Zealand?
Sure, because you can compare it to comparable places within the United States. Say Hawaii and Puerto Rico, both islands, both rough enough the same sort of population. We have 5 million people here. And one of those 3 is COVID free, and the others are suffering heavily from it. And I get no pleasure at all from the suffering of places that I love, including San Francisco, certainly including Hawaii and Puerto Rico.
So how was it that you were able in 3 weeks to move to New Zealand? One of you must have had New Zealand citizenship.
Yes, we lived here for 14 years. I taught at the world's southernmost medical school. And Ethan was a TV star here, the only American face and voice on television here. And fortunately, during that time, we took out New Zealand citizenship. Wasn't necessary. We could vote, we could own land, we could own a house, we could do virtually everything. But we decided, just as the right thing to do, to become citizens. Thank goodness. So with citizenship, we can automatically come back unless the borders are, there's so many people coming back that the borders are temporarily closed. So we were afraid that was going to happen. So we came back and we just made the decision. We decided to come back in 3 weeks.
So you got in through some loopholes, because now the border is closed again, correct?
I'm not even sure whether it's closed. I don't think it's closed at the moment. It wasn't a loophole. It was the ordinary return system, which, by the way, is very tight. So that when we got off the plane in Auckland, the first thing that they did was say, "Hi, let's just take your temperature. Now go to that booth over there. Now go to that booth. Now get on the bus," which took us 30 seconds to the hotel, which we could not leave the grounds of for the next 2 weeks. And when I say we couldn't leave the grounds of, there have been 50,000 people returned to New Zealand, all citizens. And there have been 8 escapees out of 50,000. They take it seriously.
Mm-hmm. So what is the tone of the news coverage now in New Zealand coming from the United States? I mean, here, of course, it's 24/7 blaring everywhere. That's why I live for the PBS News Hours, the one place where I can get my news without being yelled at or hearing people yell at each other.
Both in New Zealand and in almost everywhere else in the world that I know of, the news in the United States is important. Trump features bigly and very negatively, to put it mildly. They record, Trump has just said, President Trump, they're very polite here, President Trump has just said that he's done an outstanding job. He gives himself an A+ on the same day that the country hit 200,000 deaths. So it's covered, but then there was a hit and run in Christchurch is the next thing. So it's not 24/7. I understand what you're saying, man. Thank you very much for no more 24/7.
You, of course, have written for years, travel writing. You're a well-known brand here in San Francisco. I know a lot of people, the Bay Area Travel Writers Association, miss you. Are you still going to continue your writing?
Oh, absolutely. The problem with continuing it is that most of my outlets have either disappeared or so shrunk that it's very hard to sell an article, sometimes hard to give away an article.
Mm-hmm, yes.
Just one example, a New Zealand example. I was writing for 2 of the leading magazines of the country. All the magazines in the country, the leading ones, were owned by a German company, Bauer Media. And one day, several months ago, they said, "Auf Wiedersehen, we're shutting the entire country down now." So my editor friends got fired, my articles never appeared. Those magazines are starting to slowly come back under new ownership, and I'm hoping for a brighter future there. But in America, my regular outlets, my sometimes outlets, are either closed down or are so shaky that they're not taking much now.
Right. We just have a few minutes left. I'd like to ask you, when do you think this will be over, and what do you think over means?
A good question. And I wish this were not my answer. had read a very nice piece by another San Francisco travel writer about visiting Chicago. And as he's in the airport listening to the sounds of the airplane is coming, this one's coming late, this one's going to a new gate, comes an announcement that says, if you have the symptoms of COVID or have been in touch with someone with COVID, we recommend that you spend the next 2 weeks in quarantine. If that's the real response, and it is in America, it ain't going to be over for a very long time. The death count will grow horribly. In New Zealand, as much as we can protect ourselves here, and they've done an outstanding job, all I'll say is we have a much better shot at it. It's a serious virus. And it may get through the barriers of every place eventually, or they may come up with a vaccine eventually that will stop this one. There will be more coming. I don't have a positive thing here. We can do our best, or as in the US, not do our best. And those are the consequences for now. I don't have a bright future here.
So you don't think you'll be coming back to visit California or San Francisco anytime soon?
We have a daughter there. I miss her terribly. But we will not be coming back as long as COVID is alive there.
So in closing, because I like to try to find optimism in something.
Me too, believe it or not.
Yeah. Any good advice or signs of hope for New Zealand seems to be doing well, and you and your better half are doing well. Any news or good advice or hints of optimism for those of us who are still in this great pause in the United States, 40 days away from the election?
Well, the advice that I give is the same as Dr. Fauci gives: wear a mask, keep 6 feet apart. For God's sakes, don't go to a bar. You can live without getting your hair done. And there's all kinds of things you can do to protect yourself if the government is not effectively protecting you. So yes, there is that. And I like everybody else, I end my letters now that say, stay safe, stay well, stay sane, and stay kind.
I agree. There's a good deal to be said for being compassionate. It's one of my favorite phrases is compassion is the key. Well, Jules Older, not only a talented writer, but a compassionate writer. I love your travel writing, have for years. And I'm sure you'll continue to find an outlet for it, even if it's like me, hosting an online TV show or some blogs. So please keep on writing and keep on keeping on. This is David Perry. We've been speaking to Jules Older from his new home in New Zealand. This is David Perry. Ahoy.
Ahoy.